Hello, my name is Keshwani. It's Keshwani, Keshwani. I have been solving data sufficiency problems out of this book here, GMAT Review, the official guide, 12th edition. If you do not own this book already, purchase one immediately. The problem that I'm about to solve is the one that you're going to find on page number 273. The very last problem on the page, data sufficiency number 13. Let's take a look at it. It says the charge for a telephone call between city R and city S is 42 cents for each of the first 3 minutes. It's very important that you read the questions properly. Don't read the questions in a hurry, in a cursory manner. Never read the problem cursorily. There are smart ways of saving time on the exam, and then there are not so smart ways of saving times. Trying to save 3 seconds by reading the problem in a hurry, cursorily, is not a smart way of saving time. The way you save time in the exam is by learning the tricks and the techniques, and by having all the basic concepts that they test on the exam at your fingertips, which is what we do in the tutoring to get you prepared for the exam, so that you know all the things that you need to know and don't worry about anything that's not going to appear on the exam. You don't have to learn everything, just the basic things that appear on the exam, and that's all. Anyway, enough said. So read the questions carefully. Make sure that you pay attention to every single word, because sometimes one word in the exam in the problem can make a world of a difference. Here they're not saying that we are paying 42 cents for the first 3 minutes. It says we are paying 42 cents for each of the first 3 minutes. So here's my telephone call. Total cost of a call lasting X minutes. Total call is going to last X minutes, whatever the X might be. It may last for 5 minutes, it may last for 10 minutes, but for the first 3 minutes, plus, perhaps I'm making too much of it, perhaps plus the rest of the call. So for the first 3 minutes, I'm going to pay 3 times 42, and let's see how much they're going to charge us for the rest of the call. You see, this is how you digest the problem. I haven't even finished reading the whole thing because I wasn't ready for the rest of this thing. I just wanted to digest the first part. Now I'm ready to read the second part. And then they go on to say, and 18 cents for each additional minute. There you go. So we're going to pay 18 cents, but for how many minutes? How do you express each additional minute? Well, if it's lasting for X minutes, and you already paid for 3 minutes, if you already paid for 3 minutes and the call is lasting for X minutes, then the leftover amount is X minus 3. That's your leftover amount. The rest of the call is X minus 3 minutes, and you're paying 18 cents for that rest of the call. A certain call between these two cities lasted for X minutes, where X is an integer. They're telling you that X is a whole number. In other words, the call is not going to last. The telephone company is not going to charge you for 3.5 minutes or 3.25 minutes or 3.1 minutes. The telephone company is going to charge you either 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes. It's going to be a whole number. The question simply is, how long did the call last? In other words, how long did the call last? In other words, they're asking you, what is X? The question here is, what is X? And that's the question. And that our job is to make sure, our job is to determine whether or not we have sufficient data, hence the data sufficiency, whether or not we have sufficient data in the first statement by itself, or the second statement by itself. The word only is very important. That's the operative word. Our job is to figure out if we have sufficient data to answer this question. We don't actually have to solve for it. We just have to be smart enough to realize whether or not we have enough data that it can be solved, that one could figure out what X is. Our job is to figure out if only the first statement has enough data to answer this question, or only the second statement has enough information to answer the question, or by putting the two statements together we can determine what x is, or neither of those two statements are any good. Those are your choices. Only one by itself is good enough to answer the question, or only the two by itself is good enough to answer the questions, or one needs both in order to answer this question. And if one works by itself and two works by itself, then the answer choice D would be the correct answer, which tells me that either of these two statements will do the job. And finally, neither. Let's take a look at it. The very first thing we do in the data sufficiency problem, if you've been watching my previous videos, the first 12 videos, as soon as the data sufficiency problem pops up on the screen, get in the habit of doing this thing. As soon as the data sufficiency problem pops up on the screen, write down A, D, B, C, E. Just make that your mantra. If you don't know what mantra means, pick up a proper dictionary and learn it. A mantra is it's a Hindi word. It's just a mystical chant. Usually you hear in the temple and so forth. That should be your mantra. A, D, B, C, E. A, D, B, C, E. Get in the habit of doing this thing until the day of the exam. Once you've taken the exam, you get the score on the screen, you're happy with the score, you can forget all about that. Okay, but until that time, you train yourself. A, D, B, C, E. What that tells us is that the correct answer, whatever it is in this problem, it's going to be either out of this group or out of this group. That's all. In other words, if you eliminate A, D is also gone. If you can eliminate B, then C and E are also gone. And I explain all of this thing in the introduction. If you have not watched the introduction, go ahead and watch it. This is a tag, GMAT 12E, Data Sufficiency Intro. Go ahead and watch it if you have not. Let's look at the first statement. It says the charge for the first 3 minutes of the call was 36 cents less than the charge for the remainder of the call. Oh yeah, this is pretty nasty. It's messy. I don't like it. I think I'm going to skip the first statement. Is it okay? Of course it's okay. Just because the statement is the first statement does not mean that you're required to look at that first. Nobody's there to supervise you as to which statement you're analyzing first. Let's look at second statement. Maybe second statement is not that messy. The second statement says the total charge for the call was $2.88. There you go. That's much simpler. So I'm going to look at the second statement first. And since I'm looking at the second statement first, I have a change in plan. This A and B are going to switch their position. A is going to go there and B is going to come here. So we have to do that. This isn't. And you do that in the exam. Write down A, D, B, C, E. And if it turns out that the nature of the problem is such that you prefer to look at second statement first, then just, cross out A and B and just change their positions. So now we have B, D, A, C, E, which is unusual, but that's okay. The second statement tells me total charge for the call was $2.88. That is my equation for the total cost. This X and the multiplication sign is kind of confusing, isn't it? I just realized it. Let me change my X here. This is the X. Let's put it in. So that it doesn't look like a multiplication sign. Here is my multiplication sign. Well, if you know that this equals 288, in our case it will not be 2.88 because the way I have set up so far, as you probably noticed, is that I hate working with the decimal. So I set it up in cents. You see, I did not put down 0.42. I did not put down 0.18. I put down 18. So I'm expressing in cents. So there is the equation. Okay, the question is there enough information there? A, D, B, C, E. Cross out A and B and change their position. Question is there enough information here to figure out the X? Of course there is. This is a whole number. So your X is simply going to be, you take, whatever this is, x is going to be, this equation can be solved very easily for x. It's a linear equation. It's a linear equation. 42 times 3, you're going to subtract that amount from both sides, from 288, you're going to subtract that, and that's going to give you 18 times x minus 3, and then whatever this amount is, you end up here, divide both sides by 18, that gives you x minus 3, and solve for x. I'm not going to actually do it. The point here is that it can be done. That's all you need to know. So the second statement by itself is good enough. This is your second statement. This part, 288, comes from the second statement. And that is good enough. That tells me that these answer choices are impossible. These answer choices are impossible. The answer has to be either B or D. Let's look at the first statement now. Let's look at the first statement. The first statement is a little tricky. You have to slow down and make sure you understand it. It says the charge for the first 3 minutes of the call was 36 cents less than the charge for the remainder of the call. So let's pretend the charge for the remainder of the call was, let's call it C cents. Rather C cents, not C dollars. This looks like Canadian dollars. C cents. Well, if the charge for the remainder of the call is C cents, then first statement tells me that the charge for the first 3 minutes was 36 cents less than that. So, for the first 3 minutes, it's going to be C minus 36, was it? But we already know what that cost is. That cost is this right here. So we can very easily solve this part for C. This is going to give us what C is. Once we figure out what that C is, we use this part, the remainder of the call, which is x minus 3 times 18. And the cost for this one is C cents, which we can figure out from here. We can solve this equation for C, and once C is figured out, we put it in here. That's all there is. That's all there is. Which means the second statement by itself, the first statement by itself also works. Which tells us that the answer is D. Either of these two statements are enough, either of this statement is enough to answer the question that is being asked, and that's all there is. Give me 1 second. If I have the time, I'm going to look in the back of the camera. I forget to look at the clock when I start, so I don't know how much time goes by. If I have the time, we can actually solve this thing just for learning purposes, even though in the real exam, you do not need to do that. Just give me 1 second. I am 13 minutes into it. I don't know how much we can do in 2 minutes or so. So I'm going to erase some of these things so we have the room. Or perhaps I should not get into it, this thing. I'm not going to start this thing. You just solve this equation for x. I hope you know how to do it. Once you solve for x, that tells me that this second statement by itself is enough, because second statement tells us the total cost was 288. If the total cost is 288, this is the equation that you will use to solve for x. So we know what x is. Second statement works. First statement tells us that the cost for the first 3 minutes is 36 cents less than the cost for the remaining call. So the charge for the remainder of the call, we are denoting it by C cents. That's this part. And this is the first 3 minutes. So you solve for C from here, you put it in here, and you solve for x. It can be done. We're not going to actually do it. That's all. That's the idea. You don't actually have to sit there and actually solve it. You just have to be able to tell whether or not it can be done. That's all there is. I hope you found it helpful. If you wish to get hold of me for personal private tutoring, I do face-to-face tutoring, obviously. I also tutor over the internet through Skype, and I tutor over the telephone. It does work if you want to try it out. If you want to get hold of me for any aspect of your preparation for GMAT, go to my website at www.for4gmat.com and send me an email. Or you can go to www.keshwaniprep.com and send me an email. Alright? Thanks.